15.
Okay. And when did you become an advanced EMT?
It was around that 2014, 15. I'm sorry.
That's okay. How long had you been How long had you been in emergency medical services around the time of August the 10th of 2019?
10 years. I was licensed. I'm sorry. I was licensed in January of 2009. I'm
okay.
sorry.
Okay. On August the 10th of 2019, you recall being dispatched to 1405 East Unaka in Johnson City?
Yes.
Okay. How are you able to remember that?
Well, there's a couple different reasons that I can remember that particular call. One being the smell of the house and the heat that was in the house that day. The other being the injury to the patient.
Okay. How many calls do you think you had been on at that point in your career?
Hundreds.
Okay. And how serious were the calls that you had been on?
I mean, I've run several cardiac arrests, car wrecks. I mean, just various different health issues, strokes, heart attacks. I mean, there was several, not including the pediatric calls that I had ran. So I had ran several bad calls.
But this particular call stands out in the midst of all that.
Yeah, I would say overall of my career, this is in my top 5 that I remember.
Okay. And do you recall what the nature of the dispatch was?
We were dispatched out routine traffic on a fall that had happened about a week ago.
Okay. So routine traffic, what does that mean?
No lights, no sirens.
Okay. What happened when you arrived at 1405?
When we got there and we got out of the truck, and as we were making our way into the home, I was met by two people that were in the house. I was met by an elderly black male and a black female.
Okay. Do you see that person in the courtroom, the female?
Yes, ma'am.
Could you point the person out for the record?
She's right there.
Will the record reflect he identified the defendant, Karen Murray?
All right. The record will reflect that Mr. Shelton has identified Ms. Karen Murray, City Council Taylor.
And is that 1405 East Unaka? Is that in Washington County?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. Sorry, Watauga. I've been saying the wrong address. 1405 East Watauga.
Yes,
Unaka,
ma'am.
Watauga. So you were met at the door. What do you recall about that, being met at the door by those two individuals?
The elderly male, when he first approached me, he said that they were doing the best they could. He kept emphasizing that they were doing the best they could with what they had.
Okay. At some point, did you enter the residence?
Yes.
Okay. What did you notice about the residence once you entered it?
The overpowering smell of urine.
Okay. What did you do after you entered the residence?
I continued to take information from the male that I was talking to.
Okay. And who was running that call? Was anybody else running that call with you?
Yes, Paramedic Jenkins was with me that day.
Okay. And you know where was he when you were trying to obtain the information?
When we went into the home, I stayed with the family and was getting information, and he went to the patient.
Okay. Do you recall where the patient was located in the house?
She was, when you come through the front door, there was like a living room. She was down the hall and to the left in a room.
Okay. And did anything change about the odor of urine that you were smelling as you entered the home?
It continued to get worse.
Okay. So at some point, did you make contact with the patient?
Yes, ma'am.
Tell us how that occurred.
As I was continuing to get information, we were going down the hall back that way to the patient's room, and my partner steps out and says, "You need to get in here." And I asked him what was going on, and he said, "Well, go in and look at her ankle." He said, "Go in and look at her ankle."
Okay. And when you entered that room, tell the ladies and gentlemen of the jury what you saw.
I saw an elderly black female laying in a bed. She was laying on her back. There was There was no sheet on this bed. It was one of the plastic mattresses like you see in a hospital. There was no sheet on the bed. She had on a white T-shirt. She had vomited at some point, and the vomit was still on the T-shirt. Again, the smell of urine was rough, and it being hot in that house, it just made it 10 times worse. When I looked at the patient's ankle and looked at the injury that we were called out on, it was a compound ankle fracture, so the bone was sticking out of the skin. I remember as I looked and assessed the patient, the bed had urine in it, and it had been there long enough that it had turned colors. It was brown. The patient had fecal matter on her, had fecal matter around her ankle. It was rough to even look at. The 10 years that I had been on the ambulance, that was one of the roughest scenes that I had witnessed at that point. Just the out and out neglect.
The fecal matter that was on her on the bed, did it look fresh to you, or?
No, it was dry, and it was in various stages of drying. It had been there for a bit.
And what led you to that?
Well, the way it was dried, and there was also some mold on some of the fecal matter.
You said that you had assessed the patient. What were you doing to assess the patient at that time?
I had come in and was looking at her ankle and was just checking her over to make sure that there was no other injuries. The obvious was the ankle.
Was there, you said the obvious, was there anything else you noticed about her?
She had her medical history. She had a stroke, so she had contractures. So she was bound. Her arms were up and contracted. She was nonverbal. One of her eyes was swollen and matted shut. There was also some things around her neck. It was a yeast infection that was around her neck, and that just does not happen overnight.
Okay. So as part of the training you received during the EMT, that includes fractures?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. Was there anything of significant, aside from the bone being exposed, about the fracture that you noticed?
Yeah, it was discolored. The bone was discolored, and it was dried at the end. That is not something that happens within just a few hours. That's days of that bone being exposed.
Okay. Do you recall if you saw blood around the injury?
Yes, it was dried.
Was there any fresh blood around the injury?
No, ma'am.
Do you recall whether or not you saw any bandaging?
There was no bandaging.
I'm going to ask the bailiff to hand you a photo. Do you recognize what's in that photo?
Yes, I recognize her ankle and recognize the fracture.
Okay.
But I will say there is no fecal matter on that picture.
Okay. And you said there was fecal matter on the. Okay. I'm going to ask the bailiff to hand you. A blue Sharpie.
Yes, ma'am.
And I want you to mark on that photo where you saw fecal matter.
All right. Ladies and gentlemen, this is Exhibit 14 without objection. marked and moved into evidence. Exhibits 1 through 13A and B are in the record, taken and entered into evidence pursuant to the deposition for proof testimony of Dr. Christy Lawson. You will see those exhibits when her deposition is presented to you in evidence in this trial. That is why we are out of sequence. Those exhibits were pre-marked.
Can I show defense counsel where he's marked it?
All right. Did you get that marked yet? No. Okay. All right. Exhibit 14 will be marked and moved into evidence.
And just to clarify, the areas where you have the blue, is that where you saw fecal matter?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. I'm guessing it was obvious that she needed to be transported for medical care.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. Based on what you saw when you arrived, what type of call was this?
This was a trauma call.
Okay. Were you and paramedic Jenkins able to remove her from the house on your own?
No.
Okay, how was that done?
We had called the fire department to come help us to carry her out on a draw sheet.
Okay. And for us, I mean, I've learned because I've talked to you, but can you explain to everyone what a draw sheet carry is?
Basically, you put the patient on a flat sheet and you use the four corners of the sheet to carry them out is what you're doing.
Okay. And is that the process that you use to transport Miss Murray to the ambulance?
We carried her outside so we could put her on the stretcher, and then we
Okay.
took the stretcher and put her in the ambulance, yes.
Okay. How did that process go?
It went fairly well, but when we got her ready to move her, we had dressed the wound. We had put wet gauze on the end of the bone to cover it. We secured her foot and stabilized it so we could roll her onto her side opposite the injury to put her on the sheet. And when we rolled her, she yelled. She screamed in pain.
Okay. And based on your training and experience, you could tell this was a scream of pain?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. Prior to moving her, were you able to give her anything for pain?
Yes, paramedic Jenkins give her something for pain.
Okay. Once you had her in the ambulance, who was in the ambulance when you transported her?
It was myself, paramedic Jenkins, and a fireman that was in the back of the ambulance.
Why were the other firemen present?
The other fireman was present in the back of the ambulance just in case we needed extra help giving her treatment.
Okay. One moment, please.
Discussed. Removed sometime prior to your arrival. Is that fair to say?
That is fair to say, but the urine that was in the bed would tell me that there was no sheet on there prior to me getting there.
Okay. Did you know anything about any problems that Mrs. Murray had with incontinence or anything like that? Okay. Now, you talked about her having a diaper that was full, that was pretty full. You couldn't say how long before you got there that she had last, used the bathroom, or how long it had been in that state, could you?
No.
Okay. So when you were treating her, when you talked about putting the wet gauze, I think, and trying to treat her ankle, that was not the point where she cried out whenever you were treating the ankle initially. Is that correct?
No, when we put the wet gauze on there, we didn't stabilize anything at that time. We didn't manipulate her. We just put that on there.
Okay. But what I mean is she didn't cry out or anything
Not at that time, no.
It wasn't until she was rolled over that she cried out. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay. Do you remember how you all rolled her? Do you remember on her right side, left side? Do you remember?
We rolled away from the injury.
Okay.
You never rolled towards an injury.
Okay. With the, you said she had vomit on her shirt.
Yes.
And you couldn't say how long that had been there either. Is that fair?
It was dried.
Okay. Let's see. Did you notice any saliva or anything around her mouth?
Not that I can recall.
Okay. And with regards to bandaging, I mean, you said you testified that you didn't see any bandaging, but you couldn't say for certain if there was bandaging on it that was taken off before you arrived. Is that fair?
That's fair.
Okay. Now I would imagine in your job, your first priority is stabilizing people that are in, dire straits. That's correct, I would imagine.
Yes, sir.
Is there ever a situation where you all will take photographs of a scene, or is that something that you leave for police to do?
That is not in our job description.
Sure. You're too busy trying to get people where they need to go, not take pictures. Is that right?
Yes, sir.
Okay. And with regards to the, only a couple more questions on this. With regards to what you said was the fecal matter around her ankle, you couldn't say how that got there or, how that came to be there, I guess, right?
No, sir.
Okay. All right. I think that's all the questions I have, Mr. Shelton. Thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. Donaldson, cross-examination on behalf of Mr. Murray.
Mr. Shelton, when were you licensed as an EMT again?
It was January of 2009.
And was that as a basic EMT?
No, it was as an EMT IV tech is what it was.
Okay, and is that the highest level of EMT?
No, sir.
Is that a medium level of EMT?
Yes.
Okay. And have you gone for that higher qualification since then?
I did at one point.
Okay. You arrived at this home, it was about 8:36 in the evening, is that correct?
Yes, sir.
Do you happen to remember how hot it was that day?
I don't remember the exact temperature, but it was hot.
It was hot?
Yes.
Okay. It was in August, right?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Do you know if the family had any central heat and air by chance?
I do not.
Okay, but it was hot,
Yes.
right? And you did see the three family members there, is that correct?
Yes.
You saw Mr. Murray, you saw Michael Murray, and Karen Murray.
Yes.
They were all there with their mother and wife.
Yes.
And you said that you got her out of this house with the drop sheet, is that correct?
Yes.
And the drop sheet, you used the four corners. You got one corner at her head, is that right? One corner at her feet, and then a corner on either side of her?
Hold on. You would say yes or no out loud. You're being recorded.
Yes, ma'am. Sorry.
If you could accompany your nods with an audible response.
Yes, ma'am.
We need that
I'll
for the
ask the
court
questions again. So the four corners, one corner is at the head,
Yes.
one corner is at the feet,
Yes.
and then the two corners at the side.
Yes.
And so, did you use the firemen to get her out?
They assisted us.
They assisted you?
Yes.
Okay. And how many people were hands-on to take her out on that particular draw sheet?
5.
5. Okay. At the level of EMT that you were at, do you ever...
We do need